Mid-2010, a woman named Shannan Gilbert goes missing. Later that year, 4 women were found while searching for Shannan Gilbert. These 4 women become known as the Gilgo 4. The next year, a few months later, 6 additional remains are found. 11 years goes by. In early 2022, finally a task force is formed, and within a matter of months, they find the guy who they believe is the killer. And they got the DNA from a piece of pizza crust. By now, everyone knows the story, but I'm here to tell you a story you haven't heard, give you details you may not be aware of, and connect some people you may not have known even existed, as we question everything about the Long Island serial murders. Now guys, there was so much information to uncover that this video turned into a 3-part series, and by part 3, you will be seeing this case in a whole new light. So please make sure to hit that subscribe button because you don't want to miss as this series unfolds. It all starts in 2007. We're talking about the Gilgo 4 here. So the first one that went missing was Maureen Brainard-Barnes. She was 25 years old when she went missing. She was a mother of 2. She had worked as a blackjack dealer, as a clerk at ShopRite, and in the 6 months before she vanished as an escort. She was actually out of the sex industry for 7 months, but then because she got an eviction notice, she returned. The night that she went missing, she traveled with her friend out to a Motel 8. She called her friend, and she told her she would be going to meet someone outside of the motel. That night, her friend returned home. Barnes stayed behind. After she made that call, no one ever heard from her again. The police didn't care to investigate because she was a sex worker, and her case went cold. In 2009, 2 years later, Melissa Barthelemy, she was 24 the last time she was seen. She was also a sex worker, and July 12th, 2009, she told a friend she was going to see someone and be back in the morning. Her cell phone records show that she traveled from Bronx to Manhattan. 1 week later, Barthelemy's mother reports her missing to the NYPD. After she is reported missing, her younger sister starts getting taunting calls. Now, these calls were made from such populated areas that they were untraceable, so nothing came of them, but we will remember that for later. A year later, in 2010, in June and September, respectively, Megan Waterman and Amber Costello go missing. Megan Waterman, she was 22 when she went missing. She lives in Maine, she's a mother, and she has a 3-year-old daughter. And she was another sex worker. She would live in Maine, but then she would travel to New York for like a week to do sex work, and then she would come back. The last time she was seen was by her family boarding a New York-bound train in Maine. Now, on June 6th, she called her pimp to tell him that she was going to a convenience store near the hotel, and that is the last anybody ever heard of her. 2 days later, she was reported missing to the Scarborough, Maine Police Department because she didn't check up on her daughter, which she always does. And the last one of the Gilgo 4 is Amber Costello. She was also a sex worker, and she did that to support her and her roommate's heroin addiction. Now, Amber Costello did an interesting thing. She did a very interesting thing as a sex worker, and I don't mean it like that. Her and her roommates would pull a scam on people. So she would make the meeting, they would come to the house, and then before any sexual things were done, one of the roommates would come out and they would confront Amber Costello and the guy and be like, hey, what's going on? I'm her boyfriend. And the guys would usually get scared and be like, oh, fuck this shit. And they would steal the money and she wouldn't have to do any sexual stuff for it. So they ran this scam like a few different times. We'll come back to that, but it's important to know, September 2nd, 2010, the last time she was seen was leaving her house to get into somebody's car who was picking her up for a meeting. Because of how stuff was going, she did not have the same kinds of families as these other people, and she was not ever reported missing. But just before that, May 2010, a woman named Shannan Gilbert goes missing. Now, she is not part of the Gilgo 4, but she plays a big role. She was also a sex worker, and she was going out on a job. While she was out on that job, about 4:50 in the morning, she made a 911 call. So on that call, she's saying that someone is after her. She bangs on a bunch of different people's doors in the area. They also call the cops for her. She runs into the swampy area, and that's the last anybody sees of her. Now, Suffolk County Police withheld the 911 call. It was part of an ongoing investigation. They said there was no desperation in her voice. They thought that, she was just like on drugs or something like that. They didn't think it was a murder. So, because she was a sex worker and all of those missing persons reports, those people were also sex workers. They didn't care to look for any of them. Now, Shannan Gilbert making that 911 call meant that they could not ignore it because she was on the line with somebody saying, "Someone is after me, please help me." The only reason they were searching for Shannan Gilbert is because she made that 911 call. On December 11th, 2010, a police officer and his dog, they were just on a routine training exercise, and they discovered the skeletal remains of Melissa Barthelemy. They found her in a burlap sack that was almost fully disintegrated because she was out there for so long. They didn't know who it was yet. But since they found someone and they know that there have been missing persons reports, they're like, all right, well, we got to keep fucking searching the area then, right? 2 days later, on December 13th, 2 days later, the police commissioner announces that 3 more bodies have been uncovered in the same area. The 4 women who were found come to be known as the Gilgo 4. Now, the same area is almost a misnomer. All of the bodies were found within a half of a mile, and each body was about 500 feet from the other body. If you're driving at like 60 miles an hour, that's the difference of like 2 seconds in your car. That's how close all these bodies were found. The search continues, obviously, because if you find 4 bodies right next to each other, then you're probably thinking, well, if we look another mile down the road, we're probably gonna fucking find 5 more bodies. Guess what, guys? That's what happened. In April of 2011, they discover 2 new sets of remains and 3 additional remains of previously discovered murders in the area. To explain that, we're going to go all the way back, 1996 and 1997 respectively, of 2 different Jane Does were found. Then in 2000, a woman named Valerie Mack, her partial remains were found later that year. In 2003, Jessica Taylor disappeared, and her partial remains were found the same month. And in 2011, they found additional remains of those previously discovered bodies. Then in December of that year, guess who they find? December 13th, 2011, the remains of Shannan Gilbert are found in a marsh about a half mile where she had disappeared, apparently drowned. She was the reason that they searched at all. At that point, Shannan Gilbert was found. The cops ruled it an accidental death. The bodies of the Gilgo 4 have all been identified as sex workers. And because of all those things, the case goes cold. So we're going to take you through each milestone of the investigation. Now, all the evidence we're talking about today only pertains to the court document that was used for the arrest, nothing that came afterwards. Remember, the case was cold from 2010. In January 2022, Rodney Harrison becomes Suffolk County Police Commissioner. He vows that the Long Island serial killer would be a top priority, and he immediately builds a task force. In the same month, a new DA, Ray Tierney. So the top 2 people, they are raring to go, dude. February 1st, 2022, they have their first task force meeting. Then 1 month later, on March 14th, 2022, Rex Heuermann's name. Now, I'm not even sure if that's how you say his name, but let's be fair, it doesn't really matter. Rex Heuermann's name comes up for the first time when a state police investigator realizes Rex owns a Chevy Avalanche. Now, the Chevy Avalanche was a truck that a witness told them they saw him drive when they saw Amy Costello for the last time alive. And he was described as a big guy the size of an ogre, white with glasses and that dark hair. The main speculation was a white male, 30s to 50s, maybe multiple killers, probably an everyman, and maybe ties to law enforcement because he knew the exact amount of time that he could be connected to a cell tower without getting traced. He was just very good at hiding his tracks in a way that a normal person wouldn't understand how to do. This guy was a white male. He was also an everyman. He was obviously not multiple killers. He didn't have ties to law enforcement, but he did have ties to the truck. And for the first time since 2010, when they found the bodies, they have a suspect. 2 months of trying, they get a guy's name after 10 years of nothing. How fucking ridiculous is that? Now, because he was connected from the truck, they started looking at the other things because the FBI had a couple of areas of interest for the burner phones that were used to contact all of the women who were murdered. Massapequa Park and Midtown Manhattan. Now, Rex Heuermann lives in Massapequa Park and he works in Midtown Manhattan. Now, when we go to the DNA, since the murders happened between 2007 and 2009, and the bodies were recovered in late 2010, there were only a few hairs that were even viable for DNA testing. But they were not viable for nuclear DNA testing. They had to wait 10 years for mitochondrial DNA testing to be developed and viable. And because that was now viable, they could take those few hairs that they found on the bodies and test them. But they needed something to match against those hairs. So, on July 21st, 2022, undercover detective stole some bottles out of the trash outside of their house. And the testing determined that it was a female DNA profile that matched female hairs found on the bodies. This led them to believe this was Rex's wife. Then on January 26, 2023, police retrieve a discarded pizza box with some crust, and the swab they took from the crust matched the male DNA profile of the hair found on one of the bodies. They decided it was Rex, and on July 13th of this year, 2023, they moved in for the arrest. As it stands right now, he has been charged with 3 murders and 1 he's suspected of. And they're still investigating 6+. Now, there has been a lot of information going around. One of the things is they arrested him earlier than they would have because, in all honesty, they need to make this case stronger. And the police have even said that. So the police put out a statement saying there was a question of public safety. They wanted to move in for the arrest. And when they said that, everybody started thinking, oh, well, that means he was getting ready to kill again. But that is actually not true. What happened is that the case was in a grand jury. And for those of you who don't know what a grand jury is, a case has to be decided if you can charge someone. So they present all the evidence they have, and based on that, the jury decides if they should indict this person. So the grand jury decided yes, and then the grand jury went home. They were worried that someone on that jury would leak the information and it would somehow get back to Rex Heuermann. And if that happened, he could have fled the country or done any number of things that would make it very, very hard to get him. So that was the real reason that they arrested him when they did, the grand jury. Well, guys, thank you so much for making it to the end of part 1. Don't forget to subscribe because in part 2, we'll be questioning all the evidence brought against Rex Heuermann, and in part 3, we unravel the real conspiracy and find out who is ultimately responsible for the Long Island serial murders.